everyone. Thank you very much for coming today. My name is Jennifer Doelman. I'm a farmer, a certified crop advisor, mother beekeeper, crop geek from up in Renfrew County. So they asked me to come today not because I'm an expert, because I'm certainly not. I'm more of a soil health explorer. Like I think a lot of you guys that are coming to the conference today. So that's our farm up in Renfrew. So we've got about 2,500 acres. I'm a third generation farmer there. And we have a very diverse rotation because we're seed growers. So that's been something that's been a big part of our soil health luxury. The tricky thing for us though is that we were beef beforehand, and then in 2000, which was thankfully before BSC, we got out of the cattle to focus on the crop inputs business that we also have. And we've really noticed once the forages were out of the rotation, once corn and soybeans started picking up in prices and we moved more to corn and beans, our soil density started to get to be a problem. I like to say that we have very honest soils. In the Bible they say you should be slow to anger and quick to forgive, and our soils are pretty well the opposite of that. If we do something wrong, she doesn't forgive us for about 10 years, so she's very, very honest. We're predominantly heavy silty clay soil. We are 2,600 heat units, which is similar to what Dev's territory is. However, our frost-free period is a full week shorter. So it's a mad dash for us. And we are in a rain shadow of both the Ottawa River and the Bonnechere Ridge. So it's really fun watching your neighbors get rain and never you. So we are in a rain shadow. So our biggest challenges are drought, soil structure, time, cash flow, and labor, like I'm sure for a lot of you guys. So the aha moments. It's hard when you're a crop advisor and a crop input supplier and you're doing everything you're supposed to do and you're still not making ends meet. And that was the tricky thing for us, was that what were we doing wrong? We had regular summer droughts and tight soils. And oftentimes that would be resulting in financial stress, feelings of helplessness and frustration. We needed to do something different, but we didn't quite know what. So the biggest thing here is that in any business, as much as we love farming, it's a business. So long term, we needed to be looking at our profitability. So sustainability is very important, but we all know sustainability includes fiscal as well. And so for us, we look at the full rotation, not just crop by crop. And so it's easy for me to say, I guess, where I'm from, but if you can't pencil out wheat in your rotation, you're probably not doing your math right, because it makes the corn and the beans more profitable. Now when it comes to cover crops and a lot of these exotic things, it's really fun to buy new equipment or buy expensive seeds. But in the short term, the cash flow needs to set your budget, because in the end, you guys want to go away for Christmas, or do you want to, spend money on seeds? So the big thing for us is trying to make sure it's sustainable for the whole thing. Risk management and resiliency is the biggest thing as well. Someday I really hope to be able to say, man, why do I pay for crop insurance? I've never needed to make a claim. That's my goal for down the road, is that then we're not having to worry. And it's nice that things like this, like soil and crop, are big benefits to what you do, because I'm a third generation soil and crop member. So on our farm, everything is about seek, test, adopt. So you just try a little bit here and there. The question is, where do you start? There's a lot of information. You come home from days like today, you're all inspired, and half your farm wasn't with you, and you get home and then the hangover hits because everybody thinks you're crazy, nobody wants to try anything new, or you try one thing and it's an epic failure. That's why we're here. We can tell you all about our failures. So the first thing you need to do is self-assess. Do you have some sacred cows on your farm? Do you have equipment you love to run? Are you a recreational tillager? Do you have bad habits that you need to get rid of? The biggest thing for us is we have to take the emotion out of it. I'm a really passionate person, and I'm part of a team of people, my father and my husband. So we all have different perspectives of the same things. So what we've been doing over the past few years, rather than, because I'm part Irish, so our fights are pretty epic. Whenever we do disagree on something, is we always go back to the numbers. So we do the cost roll up on the production, and then we actually take the farms and we actually keep track. So when you see a farm where it's bolded, that means it was above average for my crop for the year on corn, and this was below average. Everything's by the ton, and I keep track year after year. Once I get, again, because you've got your sacred cows, the fields that aren't pulling their own weight get marked with a red, and they're the ones I focus a lot of my soil health on. Or rented ground, I get rid of it if the landlord's not willing to do drainage or do a long-term rental agreement, because working for free sucks. So what we do is we evaluate for certain trends, soil types, management styles. We'll try something on one farm and not another and just keep adopting. But most importantly, you need to listen to your soil. And so this is what our soil told us. And again, our soil's very honest, so maybe for you it's a little trickier. But we had to stop doing a few things. We'd stop planting early. It's tricky because we all know, we've seen the data. When you plant early, you get more yields. But it's like a game of telephone, and we missed the end of the message, and it was plant early when the soil is fit. So we were mudding things in, and when you've got a heavy clay and you're pushing it ahead of a rain and you hope the rain forgives, you're creating a tomb around that seed, and the roots aren't going to be able to do anything no matter how much fertility you have there. The recreational traffic, we take out a lot of fence lines, which means that the roads that we used to have change. And my dad's got bad knees and he likes to crop scout with a pickup truck. It's a work in progress. And again, just letting go farms that aren't profitable or crops. Like, I love my sunflowers, but we had to take them out of the rotation for a few years because we were having pest issues. The things to keep doing, keep learning. Days like today, have people tell you, well, this is what works and this is what doesn't work. We went down to Kaiser's. You guys all know Kaiser's fairly well in this neighborhood. And that was where Mike saw, my husband saw the closing wheels that we've been looking for to be able to make the full conversion to no-till for our corn planter. You know, go out and see other people who have similar operations to your own. Don't be afraid to ask stupid questions. I'm sure, you know, it'll come up with something interesting. Obviously, drainage improvements, and we heard that from our earlier speaker today, are crucial. And like, soil fertility is a no-brainer. You need to be looking after that. Crop diversity for us is a major part of what gives our resilience. And again, this morning's speaker really reinforced that as well. And then IPM, like, soil residue is a big thing when you're making the change. You're suddenly going to have a lot more trash if you're reducing your tillage, you're doing. You need to be thinking about the whole picture. So anecdotally on our farm, we dropped insecticides from the beans because I was having slug issues in the canola. And the best way to keep slugs at bay is brown beetle population. My canola needs to have neonics on them to protect from the flea beetle. So when the slugs eat the canola, then the ground beetle eats the slug, and then the ground beetle dies, but the slug doesn't, because it's not an insect. It doesn't die from an insecticide. So what I was doing was taking out my best employees. So for us, the crops that don't need the insecticides, I'm not putting it on, because then hopefully I'm going to keep my population up a bit more. You see that with the soybean aphids, we're not having to spray as much as we used to. Hopefully our beneficials are getting better. It's a whole thing, but that does relate back to the soil health and your residue management. And then the start doing. So the one thing is that I want to get livestock, but I got in-laws 7 hours away and I like to go on holidays. So right now we don't have livestock. But what we do is we get Orga P from the city of Gatineau, which is a biosolid. It's been really nice. Anecdotally, it looks great. But just like any of you guys, I give plans and layouts and then something happens and nobody actually knows what went where. So it's a work in progress. Active residue management is you need to be planning for it. And if anybody wants to steal a 35-foot head, I will give you the address and a beer. Dad loves this because he gets a lot off in a short time. You can see the residue pattern. We have major chaff issues. Straw is a big part of our income, and so we need to take that off. For our smaller combine, the 9790, my husband made a deflector to take the chaff out to the sides. But like, it's anytime we have to do tillage, it's because we've got a residue issue from too much chaff. So we need to be designing equipment better, or at least planning better for that. For the cover crops, keep it simple. We want something cheap because we're often dry and our season is so short. All the cover crops get put in with the drill once the fall wheat gets baled off. Same with the spring cereals. So we just put in like rye or oats or whatever's left over from the seed cleaning. I do like to put some legumes in. We often frost seed red clover into the fall wheat. And if you don't have a good rotation, this is a really great way to get that diversity. So that's where those, those daikon radishes or crimson clovers, a lot of those are really great, but keep your budget manageable and just try some things in small pockets. And you need to be scouting more. I know we're all really busy, but you probably really enjoy it once you actually get out and doing it. And the secret is adapt. It's way easier than adopting. Buying a big piece of equipment and having a failure, you're really nervous. If you can take the things you enjoy doing and the things that are different, and again, you're going back and just tweaking a little bit here or half a field here, it's a lot easier, and it's a lot easier to have family meetings than the next time. How to tell if you're making progress. So this was one of those terrible fields where I seeded down the red clover. The triticale had lodged badly. We had major, like you can actually see there's some heads here still. And I was like, oh God, the guys are gonna kill me. I really wanted to do no-till in the sunflowers, but they weren't gonna come up through that. And then I moved to the other area, and all the red clover that I was so worried about in the fall was all gone. And I'm looking at the pattern and I'm realizing it's because the earthworms had pulled it all down. So that's just the side profile button. I get pulled with the entire thing down, and that's that big hole. So my bulk density in my soil is pretty tough, but when you've got big macro pores like that, it's pretty amazing. And then just getting to the root of the matter, you need to just be out and evaluating. So you know you're getting some soil health if you are getting better planting, or earlier planting because of better infiltration and better carrying. So even though you stopped early planting, you actually get to plant earlier because you're getting your soil looked after. We have a rented ground that had been 15 years grounded ready winter beans from the previous owner. And we were really worried about it. But we haven't worked it up, and it's the first field dry every spring, even though the drainage is only moderate, just because it's got such great macro pores. We have better drought tolerance, less erosion, and better resiliency. And the side effect is our decisions are better because we're having to go back and always be checking the numbers. Separating the wheat from the chaff, you need to be measuring, because if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. And you need to be justifying the dollars and time spent, because it is a lifestyle, but it's still a business. And you're going to have better resiliency for yourself and your staff and your family if your ground's looking after you because you've looked after it. And then just keeping it objective and science-based. Sometimes I do have to laugh. It's like, if you heard of our Lord and Savior, the cover crop, we need to make sure that we're being objective about it. So, and then don't forget to have fun too. Thank you.
All right, next up, Aaron.
All right, so I know quite a few in the crowd, so I probably don't have to introduce myself, but we farm north of here, so I can't BS like I did yesterday, because you're going to be able to call it on me. So for soil health, we break it into 5 components. Erosion control, weed suppression, livestock synergy, nutrient sequestering, and adopting of no-till practices. So jumping to erosion control. We don't try to do too much tillage in the fall, but if we do, it is always followed with a cover crop, and in particular CO rye. This is 110 pounds, followed with a batterstat, a quick disc, whatever you want to call them. And what you're looking at here is 2018, the March, when it really thawed in about 4 days, and we got a boatload of water, a lot of surface water. And we're going to contrast that to coming down our grass waterway. This is the watershed north of our farm. I hope you can all see that at the back, but right in here, we don't have a laser pointer. There's a lot of sediment, a lot of dirt. I'd love to be able to stop that dirt, but we can't. It kept on going, and probably with it took some phosphorus. If we compare that to the water that's coming off the rye, I hope you can see a very distinct line right there. So that right there allows me to qualify that using a cover crop pays dividends, because it's keeping the soil, first of all, on our farm. Second of all, keeping phosphorus and nutrients on our farm as well. And that's just looking at it. So this is a 50 or 60-year-old laneway. It eroded, but right up to the line you can see where the grass plus the rye kept the soil in place. Weed suppression. There's lots of examples. The Huntco boys that can see in the back, they have one of the best pictures with regards to rye and Roundup resistant fleabane, but we're going to focus on the organic side of our farm. So we have a roller crimper on the front of our tractor. This is 2016, and we take the planter behind us, obviously. It's just a side shot. So that's the best the field looked. After that, it was a complete failure. I was working with a group in the States, chatting back and forth, and they'd recommended to crimp at about 50% anthesis. 4 days later, Dad and I, that's my dad right there, he's coming up with the gator, and we slowly watched the rye keep coming back. We crimped it again, it came back, and we ended up just no-tilling in like a sorghum, and we grazed this field the rest of the year. So that's a failure. So 2017, I licked my wounds, and in 2018, I couldn't give up. I had to go back. But this saying kept coming back to me the whole time I was doing this. So I reached out to Dr. Erin Silva and her technician in Wisconsin University, and she was a huge resource. And so what she taught me was I crimped way too early. So you want to be full anthesis, or into even, and when I say anthesis, that's pollination, or into even like a soft milk on the seed. And so this is on June 7th. We took another chance, and away we went. Luckily enough, I got to go to Portugal that year, and my dad sent me this picture. This was me in Portugal. This was my dad taking the picture. And so we fast forward 1 month. Things are looking pretty good now. Weed suppression is very good. We're quite happy. This is looking down into the canopy, so you can see the thatch is holding back, and even a bit of the material underneath of the soil changing. And so this is Dad and I. You get to farm another day, son. Now we're in September. I don't know if you can see it from the back, but we did have a bit of ragweed break through the thatch, but overall we're quite happy with it. That's looking down in the canopy, and the beans did pretty good that year. This was me combining. So they asked for a little bit of economics, so I'm not going to go through it all. You should tack on about $50 to combine, $25 to get it away from the field, and there's the economics of it. So that field at 47 bushels, you're looking at $14.10. Knock off another 50 or $100 in there, and that's about $1,000 profit per acre. Livestock synergies. So often I get people asking me, how can I put dollars and cents on cover crops? When you bring livestock into the picture, it makes a big difference, because we can actually put a dollar value on that cereal rye. So we often try to do about 100, 110, even 150 bales of cereal rye, and that'll go all through our cattle. This is a little bit more mature than we want. This is 2017. I thought it was going to be the wettest year I saw in my farming career, and then 2019 came. We also graze until the rye starts to bolt. Once it starts to bolt, what we find is they waste it, and they'll just crimp it down. I know people will say it's not waste, it's still going to the soil, but we look at it as we're wasting our time, and the cattle could go backwards on you. So we also crop in the fall. So this is the barley oat pea. So the whole farm has a perimeter fence. We use portable fences in between, and then the cross fences are with tumble wheels from Gallagher. Nutrient sequestering, particularly on the organic side, phosphorus is a very, very expensive product for us to bring in. So we're always trying to prevent it from leaving our farm in any method we can. These two pictures you're looking at here is grazing corn fields. This one being the first, and this was, I think we drilled that, I want to say in November sometime. So cereal rye is why we always go to cereal rye. You can still plant it. Heck, I think even in December we've had a catch before. So we use a lot of cereal rye in our operation. We also spread a lot of manure, compost, and chicken litter. So we use cereal rye under that circumstance too. Can everyone see this picture right here? So what I've done is I've actually applied compost perpendicular to the way I'm planting. You see green, light green, dark green? That was 2 weeks before. And the rye actually started to pick up the nutrients right away. It actually surprised me, and same with the person that I got the compost from. Adoption of no-till practices. Planting green. I've heard lots of people say it doesn't work, blah, 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 blah. And I always put a caveat on it. It can work, or you can actually screw it up, and I'll tell you why. So, on our planter, we use a single disc opener for fertilizers. I strongly advise it. Make sure you're able to get through that thatch or get through any high residues. As Jen said as well, I strongly advise you to put something that closes the trench. That was my number one sales call on my other side, on my seed side of the business, is going to people that didn't close the trench when they planted green. And lastly, the addition we added about 2 years ago was Delta Force, which is active downforce. I didn't think I was going to love it as much as I do now, and in 2019 I really saw the benefits of that program, or that machine, or that implement, adoption, whatever you want to say. The other golden rule, if you're going to plant green, soybeans, I don't think you can screw it up. Corn you can, and I'll explain why. This one is plant when the field is ready, not try to let the cover crop grow and grow and grow. That's the biggest thing that I've learned. This is that same field, and when your sprayer breaks, you got to get Steve Crothers in, and you're not on the top of the list, you got to wait a week, and that's what you're seeing. So he just sprayed that day. I don't want to see this, but sometimes you got to be flexible and try to manage for it. This is a week later, same field, and I hope you can see there's little baby corn coming up. I don't want to see that and that much thatch, but anyways, I had to work with it. So what you're looking at here is the end product, and I'm still yet to beat 2015 yields for my own personal top end. So planting green was my best in 2015. And that's looking down at the ground afterwards. So the worms and the biology has pulled all the residue down into the soils. Now we're into 2016. And this is where I made my mistake, and I actually went against my golden rule. So we had added an air cart to the back of the corn planter that year, and I had Grand electric drives, and I had trouble with them communicating with my 2630. In doing so, I was about 2.5 weeks waiting to plant this field. My golden rule is plant when the field is ready, don't wait for the cover crop. Well, couple that with the chain popping off and me not knowing it, you can see a clear difference between here and here. This is a 2x2 band of 50 pounds more than this side of nitrogen. I never got that field back. So there's a 25 bushel decrease between these two sides. And overall that year, just chatting with different producers, I was 15 bushels below. So I call this a failure. Okay. So having said that, you got to be cautious and you got to know what your threats are when you're planting green corn. With regards to soybeans, I don't think you can screw it up. There'll probably be someone in the audience tell me that I'm wrong. But what you're looking at is actually a new farm trial. So this is fierce on this side, and that was bifecta. I was doing a little trial with bent, and that's the beans coming up through the thatch afterwards. So overall, our long-term goals as a family is we're looking for every acre to be covered year-round, try to reduce tillage, and increase organic matter, or at least stop the degradation of it.
Well, while that's loading up, my name's Deb Campbell, and I'm a certified crop advisor. I'm an independent consultant. I live in Grey County and actually work in 13 counties sort of around that area. So what I chose to talk about today is sort of a case study example of a client of mine that's been on the road to achieving a better soil health, and some of the process that he went through, his thinking process, his reasons why, and some of the outcomes. So, we seem to be focusing an awful lot on soil health, and fortunately we're in a room here where we're not ostracized talking about soil health. So just to give you a bit of background on this producer, we'll call him Bob. This is a real actual farm, just so you know, it's not fictitious. So he's in a 2,650 heat unit zone, so a fairly early zone, just kind of like what Jen's area is. For him to have good cropping season, he has to get his crop in early. It's a must-have for him to achieve his yield goals on most years. Out of his entire land base, he operates 2,300 acres, but he does have roughly a quarter of his land that is non-tiled. So that's pretty significant. That's almost 600 acres. So it's a big chunk. On that non-tiled land, he does rely heavily on tillage and mostly a 2-crop rotation, beans, wheat. Just cannot get corn into those farms. They're just not early enough. But the rest of his land base maintains a 3-year rotation, and general observation is that he's fighting the low fertility scenario. Slow to build it. It's a really long process building phosphorus fertility. It takes quite an investment. And then he also operates on some fairly variable soil. It's not uncommon to swing from sand to muck to clay loam all on the same piece of ground. So that presents its own challenge. So some of his goals, these were basically back in 2014. We got into one of those philosophical discussions of where's the farm going and what's it looking like and what are some of the challenges that are holding it back. And one of his major challenges was managing labor, and I think that's a pretty constant through the entire business, the entire industry. Not enough labor. He does have 2 hired men, both of them over 70, and they're there for roughly 4 weeks in the spring and 4 weeks in the fall, and then outside of that, he's a one-man show. So that's definitely a challenge. The goal is to move to reduce tillage. Obviously, fighting this non-tiled land where it's critical to have tillage to manage it, or as we think it is anyway. So how does he have basically 2 tillage systems going on the good ground versus the non-tiled ground? Making better use of fertilizer inputs. I think we all have that on our minds, and how do we get more out of, is building phosphorus levels even practical at a certain point in time? So how do we get more out of the dollar spent? And then obviously continue to grow yields and stay profitable through the entire process. So those goals, when I kind of rhyme them off, they're very business-oriented goals. They're financial, they have a dollar attached to them, and the conversation at no point in time discussed soil health. It wasn't even on the radar through that conversation. A little bit around the reduced tillage, but not the rest of it. So some of the strategies that we put in place, he applied an organic amendment, so similar to what Jen with the Agronomy. This is Listagrow. It's a biosolid. It's a company with a new process that brings in all kinds of different biosolids, homogenizes them, adds potassium acetate to it, and then sells it back in the marketplace as a fertilizer. A very nutrient-dense product. So it was a way, at the time, it was still affordable. It's actually now more expensive than fertilizer. It's in that big of demand. They cannot supply the market, so that means the price goes up. At the time, it was affordable, and it was a good way to add a significant portion of nutrients into his system. So that was a first step on some wheat stubble. You can see the type of equipment that they're using: big tractors, big tankers, and it is all injected. Being as it's a biosolid, highly nutrient dense. Every acre gets injected so that it's in the soil and less risk of runoff. So this was about feeding the soil. It was about increasing organic matter. It's about 5 to 6% dry matter, depending on the load. So this was, kind of a step one. Step two was to get a better quantification of his nutrient levels. So we used a SWOT mapping, developed zones in the field, sampled according to those zones, and this is an example of a 240-acre farm. The ridge there on the left is sand and gravel, and the dark green zone that basically runs corner to corner across the entire landscape is muck. So, and then in the bottom right corner, there tends to be a bit of ponding because that's where the water entirely flows throughout the entire property practically. So his nutrient levels across those were basically 2 to 1, and his highest yielding zones were his lowest soil fertility levels. So good to know. We were able to go back and do some analysis on that and apply nutrients according to need. So that's another portion of soil health is getting the nutrients matched to what the soil needs and matched to what hopefully the crop needs, which will be corn for 2020. This is just an example of a script on here. Average phosphorus soil tests for this producer are under 10. So on a large land base, that's a pretty significant hurdle. For potash in general, they're under 80 parts per million. So again, another significant hurdle. So how do we make the most of the dollar spent? So we'll put it where it's needed to achieve yield. And take it off of those zones that are already high fertility and are not using it anymore. So again, right rate, right spot in the field. Implemented a cover crop strategy. Historically, it's been a bit hit and miss with some red clover as the season allowed or permitted. And we all know that red clover, we have some wins and some losses with red clover. So anytime that the red clover did not establish, we instantly put in the default of oats following harvest, so that we always had a cover crop on a cereal stubble in the fall. It really is the only window for him to be able to establish cover crops in that low heat unit zone. We don't get enough time after corn or time after soybeans to have that. I'd love to seed cereal rye in December, but we'd be going through snowbanks. So bit of an issue there. So yeah, good reliance on cover crops, and that's around stabilizing his soil, keeping it covered, again, feeding that soil life and keeping that soil active for longer periods in the season, and keeping the nutrients in place that he is putting on. So central to the strategy was switching from a conventional tillage system to a strip till system. And I'm sure some of you folks have switched tillage systems in the past, whether it was conventional to no-till or no-till back to a surface tillage of some fashion. So it's a big decision when you change your tillage practices. So we went on a fact-finding mission, drove them around to a few of my other clients that were in a strip till system, asked the questions, looked at their systems, see what all the bells and whistles and what everything did and what he liked and didn't, and that was in 2014. Fall of 2016, he actually rented a strip till unit and went out and did his first farm, and it was actually that farm that I showed you on the zone map. So highly variable and hills and other things going on in that farm, and he was pretty thrilled with the outcome when it was done. Obviously on a rental strip till, there's no fertility going down that system, so he left all the fertility on his corn planter. In the fall of 2017, he purchased the strip till unit. He was pleased enough with the outcome of his first corn crop on that one farm where he tried it. He purchased it, but still, wasn't ready to move his fertilizer off the planter, partly because his agronomist is a big believer in starter fertilizer. But this fall, he moved his bulk cart to behind his strip till and put his fertilizer down in the fall, roughly in a 4 to 6 inch distribution in the strip till. And then for this spring, he's modified his planter, still leaving liquid pop-up on the planter. All of his P&K is in that strip. And then he'll run a split 28 on each side of the row, which will also include his sulfur, to still have a really good feeding system, hopefully, right in the initial root zone of those corn plants. Corn should never be hungry, we know that. This is all about trying to optimize between soil health and production, and you can't really give up one for the other. So here's his outfit as of last fall. He's got an 8-row Kuhn Gladiator, a fairly simple basic unit, very affordable 4 years ago. These units are going up in price dramatically, as are most equipment pieces. And just a used flex coil cart. You can buy them dirt cheap. He's got a nice shop so he can monkey around and get things hooked up and situated the way he wanted. So this was out on some frost on some soybean stubble. A nice strip there that it was building that day. And then this winter's project is modifying his planter, reconfiguring his fertilizer. So the bulk 28 is in the back tote and the liquid pop-up on the front, and implemented a splitter on his on the back end for positioning that 28%. So those were kind of all the different components to his strategy, and we just kind of kept putting in one, and then the next step, and then the next step, and then we get to last fall and we're like, wow, we actually accomplished some really good steps in soil health. As a production agronomist, one of the things that my own observation with these guys yesterday is that I don't spend enough time looking at the soil. I'm always looking at the crop. That is kind of my job. But I'm really intrigued to get out and see actually what the soil looks like in some of these farms now after this process. So some of those ongoing challenges I mentioned: non-tiled land. You've got significant ponding on there, significant winter kill of wheat. I think he's had one crop of wheat out of this farm, winter wheat, and one crop of spring wheat out of this farm, and the rest has all been soybeans. Just trying to manage something around all this moisture. It does yield, and that's the kicker. So it's a low input scenario. Get what you can get off of it. You treat it a little differently. It's not always a win from a soil health perspective. So unfortunately, in buying a strip till unit, he still has all of his tillage equipment in the yard to manage his non-tiled land. In a perfect world, he would have removed some of those pieces, and particularly the chisel plow, and financed his strip till unit in place of it, but not there yet. Unfortunately, in this scenario, we're still broadcasting phosphorus and potash on a surface application for soybeans. Not the greatest scenario to place into phosphorus. So a few little tricky issues there. I am really intrigued by the plant green into cereal rye. So this year, this particular farm will be in spring wheat. We're going to try and put it into cereal rye as early as we can, get some good growth on it. Hopefully it can tolerate some water sitting on it. It'll be growing in the spring. It will dry up that surface in the spring just through natural growth, and maybe we can plant a little earlier. It's a lot of ifs, but we're still looking for those strategies. So some of the learnings: the strip till exceeded expectations. It worked on the frost. It worked on heavy red clover cover crop. He was really concerned, how is this thing going to work in a cover crop that's this dense and just an absolute carpet? It was perfect. Couldn't have asked for a better process. His yields have gone up. He's added the first year, we're not doing side by side, so it's just a trend line that he's seeing. but his yields have gone up. And I think a big part of that is the soil health, is the other measures that he's doing, and then also the efficiency of having his fertilizer right down underneath the root zone. The cover crops have done well to help moderate moisture. Even on tiled land in a low heat unit zone with lots of snow, we often have, we're waiting on things to dry up in the spring, no different than anybody else. Those cover crops are helping. They're helping to establish those natural pores, improving drainage, and of course holding on to moisture in July when we really need it. Organic matter levels on that particular farm that I showed you, they've moved from 3.8 to 4.6% over an 8-year period. Is that real? Is that just a sampling? But they have, again, the trend line is that they've gone up. That's a big move in an 8-year period, so I'm a little skeptical, but it's certainly showing a positive. And just, this is an example that I wanted to show you of taking those small incremental steps of transitioning over a period of time. It doesn't have to happen all in one season. It's just about impossible to do that all in one season. Just break it down into some components and get started.
On guy strip tilling with the plant, or is strip tilling his dry starter down in the fall? What do you think of dumping 1034 and the 28 and getting rid of the pop-up?
Putting the 1034-0 into the 28.
I don't know what he's using.
Yeah. It's a 624-6, but still.
Yeah, we were buying, still have a little ortho left.
Yeah.
And we started dumping 1034 into 28. Somebody thought it would work good because it got it there in the nitrogen for a lot of other reasons.
Yep.
And I'm thinking I'm going to use what's left of my tank and quit putting 5 or orthophosphate down. And I'm 3.5 inches off the row with my 28. I'm putting a lot down.
Yeah, I in a perfect world, I'd say do a side-by-side, but if you're going to make the entire switch, personally, I'd leave that 1034 with the seed. I don't know your base fertility, but...
I'm not putting 1034 on the seed.
No? Lots of guys do.
Yeah, I know.
For me, by the time that corn plant gets to 3 inches away, you're at 6-8 leaf. So you better have good nutrition to get it that far, because by the time you're at 5 leaf, it'll be looking for food. So in this particular producer's case, there's no way I would go to that.
Okay, by 525, I'm running almost less than 10 liters per acre.
Sorry, say that again?
The 525 I have been putting down,
Yep.
I've got it down now to under 10 liters an acre.
Yep.
No, I'm running more volume. I just
Okay.
I'm running half water.
Yep.
But I wonder if I'm really getting enough down there to...
You don't need much though, right? You need something like that. When that corn planter broke on you and you saw that line in the field.
I'm in strip till. I've got my fertility is down. So I'm going 5 inches deep with that, so
Yep.
it's 3 inches away.
Yep.
Which is a long way when you're little root.
Yeah, but we're not blowing it all to the bottom either.
What's your base? What's your base fertility on the fields?
Which one?
Well, what's the worst?
What's that?
What's your lowest fertility?
Oh, I think it's pretty bad. My fertilizer here tells me that. I don't know what that is. But we're high pH,
Yep.
so everything's tied up. Deb used to work in our area a long time ago.
Yep.
It's just, if you've got
Really
calves.
That hasn't gotten any better. Bought a lot of fertilizer, but they're not moving.
No, they don't move. No.
That pop-up's pretty crucial for vigor.
Personally, I would still have something in furrow with the seed.
I don't know, see this here.
You-
When I run out.
When you run out, send me a picture. I would love to see it. No, because
Like I'm just looking at
Yep.
what I can buy for real fertilizer. For
Absolutely.
phosphate is the spread's getting too big.
yeah, but your corn typically, you'll see the visual symptoms in the corn at roughly 4, 5, 6 leaf if there's a deficit, and you'll also see at the back end with moisture. If there's been a hungry period of time in that early stage corn, you'll see your moisture higher. So those are 2 things to watch for, and give it a go. I'm quite curious. I'm a big believer. My bias is to have starter.
Yeah.
That by the time that corn plant gets out to the bands, gets down to the fall fertilizer, it's hungry. And it really should never be hungry. So that is my bias. So I believe in that.
Okay, great. Another question?
So everybody's they've got all the world's problems solved.
All figured out? Yep.
Just with rye and following with corn, in the past I've heard there's an allelopathic effect and it could reduce your yield. Have you found anything that way? Or?
Depends who you talk to. Like I said, I have 2015 as the best corn I've ever grown, and I have 2016 as the worst corn I've ever grown. 2016, I take basically 95% of the blame for it. I planted too late. I didn't put the right fertility. I was back to the 2x2 band. We put a lot in the 2x2 band on the conventional side, so we're looking at 300 pounds. So I rely on that. And but yeah, you'll read lots of things that say it's allelopathy. I've seen pictures where right down the line you'll go off 4 or 5 inches and there'll be nothing growing up against that edge of the rye. They say that's allelopathy. Maybe it's shading. There's a lot of things that can affect it. Dwayne Falk, I asked him. He was the breeder at Guelph University back in the day, and his big thing was if you till it, you release it faster. And that was just something he had mentioned to me in the past. Do I have anything with that? I don't know.
Another question?
Yeah, I just wondered, will a healthy microbial population help release the nutrients from those tied up soils? Like they just mentioned, do the microbes actually release those tied up nutrients if they're healthy enough?
It channels things that are normally not within your seed zone, right? In some ways it's like expanding your root system. It's not like they release them, they actually like bring it to the plant. Like it's a road, it's a network, right? So there's a lot of things that get exchanged with it. Like there's a lot of good information, I'm saying information, but nutrient transfer. Sorry, there's a lot of nutrient transfer through that. I know we use a lot of brassicas, and they're supposedly really hard on the mycorrhiza, which is why I was kind of worried. I'm like, is it the canola that's making the ground really tight? And supposedly, like by putting in things that do help with it, like the oats, you counteract that, you develop it, and it creates a better, I think it's just road maintenance. Like you have better connection to the nutrients that are there. I don't know, it doesn't actually release nutrients, does it? It just connects you better?
The microbial population, it will be cycling nutrients to some degree. If you have a good microbial population, to me that's a good metric, and I wish we had a good way to measure that, but that means you have good soil health. That probably means you have good soil structure, and your roots are penetrating and touching far more surface area. That alone is giving you better uptake of nutrients. And that for me, when I'm walking a field, and I'm always paying attention to my feet. Am I walking on a parking lot, or am I walking on a pillow? And if I'm walking on a pillow, that just tells me so much about the condition of the soil, the porosity, how much development those roots can make. And I really wish, I've been asking for a long time for some good way to measure microbial activity in the soil. Really, we're measuring respiration as a extrapolation of microbial population, but to me it's not quite the same. And but most certainly they're doing a lot of nutrient release. They provide a lot of the chemistry that releases nutrients. So
I listened to a really good TED talk about that actually, where they were able to compare, how we look at supply and demand. So right now toilet paper is a really big deal. Normally toilet paper is $2, but whenever COVID-19 comes out, come on Eileen, sorry. When COVID-19 comes out, everybody goes crazy. So it's the same for the microbial populations. It's about supply and demand. So they're going to be really good at helping transfer things from higher nutrient places to lower nutrient places, even where your roots can't connect, just simply because the plants themselves are giving the fungi what they want. And so it just opens up a whole other network.
And what do you think about adding microbes as fertilizer?
I think the specialist back there is the one to ask. But,
Plug in a jug.
Bug in a jug?
So go ahead, sorry.
Just a lot of times adding microorganisms, Cynthia's really showing.
Yeah.
But I think she left. But adding microbes to a soil, there's already thousands of different species there, so a lot of times adding microbes, they have to compete with the ones that are already there. So most of the time, people haven't really found a benefit from adding microorganisms to soil, because what you want to do, like Cynthia was talking about today, is stimulate the ones that are already there as opposed to try to add them. I mean, that's a gross generalization, but.
I don't have direct application to that question, but the feedback that I've seen and the data that I've seen is if you have a stressed soil, you know, where you're fighting compaction, you're fighting drainage issues, or you know, it's sandy and it's droughty, those scenarios probably have limited microbial activity just because of the scenario, and that's where we're seeing 7, 8, 10 bushel responses to some of those microbial treatments. How do you know which one, whether you're fully in a stress scenario or not? But that's where I would target an investment if I was going to use that. Yeah.
Maybe rented ground or things like that, where you don't have the same return on investment.
Sorry, I'm new to all this, but you were saying that on non-tile drained land, people use conventional tillage, not no-till or strip-till. You know, why is why can't one switch?
So the question is, why are they using conventional tillage on non-tiled land?
Yeah, or why
as
are they
opposed
not
to-
switching to
yeah.
new technique?
So, a couple of things. On that non-tiled land, a soybean crop being harvested in October, they're probably leaving ruts. So that's a problem. So we're looking to correct the ruts that are established, and that's an annual issue or a biannual issue if he's got a rotation happening. And then the worked ground being darker, it'll warm up and dry up a little quicker in the spring, generally speaking, not always, but so hopefully they can get back in there a day or two earlier than if it wasn't worked. So those would be the two primary reasons that I see.
Thank you.
Great. Quick, one more?
One more.
Okay, one more question.
Aaron, were you planting green in the rye May 10th or
So that first picture was Mother's Day, when I said plant when the field's ready.
right?
The other one was the 25th or some of that of May in 2016, so it was super dry. So, like I said, it should have been planted about 2.5 weeks earlier. I could have been the first week of May in that field, and I should have been. So that's why I take the blame more on the plant green failing that year than the actual rye causing the problem.
Okay, great. Well, join me in thanking our